Hello and welcome to the Gooner Tool. Back again with you guys for another show, for another episode of our tactical breakdown series, our show in which we look at the players that have been linked to Arsenal, break them down in an analytical and statistical way, and give you guys the expert insight as well from a whole hosts of journalists, production people, experts in their fields on lots of different types of players. And we will be covering every single Arsenal player, or rather players maybe that we hope would become Arsenal players, but we're going to be covering every single Arsenal transfer target in as much detail as feasibly possible throughout the rest of the season, and of course into the transfer window throughout that too, leading all the way up to the start of next season and the end of the transfer window itself. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel to get all of that content and get educated upon all the players that you expect to see linked to Arsenal, which is pretty much every single player on the planet these days. Welcome, hello, and I hope you are doing well and you're getting ready to see Arsenal on Arsenal-less weekend, I should say, this weekend, of course, which might be a little bit of a blessing in disguise. But we are going to crack on with today's show and start off with, of course, looking at our expert insight on Joachim Andersen, who is the Fulham defender on loan this season from Lyon. Obviously, has returned there at the conclusion of the campaign. And Arsenal have been linked with a move of around £20 million in which they will have to rival their North London rivals Spurs to make this happen. There is a lot to kind of look at and a lot kind of break down, and we're going to do that, first of all, with the help of an expert as well, which I'm very excited about because obviously on the channel we get obviously a lot of experts who are kind of the generic kind of field, if you like, and talking to people that are interested in the entirety of French football or the entirety of Spanish football. But a few times what it's good to do is obviously get the thoughts of a specific fan of the player of that club. So I'm very happy today to be joined by Henry Hill, who is part of the production team over at Football Daily. I'm sure it's a site that you are very much familiar with. And follow to get all of your kind of Sky Sports videos and stuff like that, who he also works with too. So this is going to be Henry's insight into Joachim Andersen. So sit back, relax, enjoy, and I hope you enjoy the expert insight that's going to be coming to you right now.
Hi everyone, I'm Henry from Football Daily. Those who watch the channel should know that I am actually a Fulham fan. Pretty difficult times for me too. But the one positive I'd say from this season has been Joachim Andersen. I absolutely love this player. His relationship with Tosin at the back has been one of the redeeming features, I think, all season. And it's worth reminding that he joined us really late on. He joined us in October the 5th, by which time we'd already conceded 11 goals in 4 games. We went on to concede 47 all season, which is actually the 12th best in the Premier League. So it shows what kind of an impact he made. And he didn't have long to sort of settle in. But he proved to be a brilliant addition, really solid, really defensively sound, brought a lot of leadership to that back line, which we desperately needed. God bless Tim Ream and Dennis Adoy, but probably wasn't up to scratch. And he went on to be nominated for Player of the Month in February after Fulham only conceded 3 and 6. We picked up some really important points. I've highlighted a few of the games here, which kind of shows some of the things that I was talking about. 0-0 versus the West Ham, 5 out of 5 tackles completed, 5 clearances and interceptions. 2-0 win against Everton, that kind of what looked like it could be a turning point. We had the Leicester victory and the Everton victory, but in that one, 91% passing accuracy. The 1-1 versus Burnley, 8 aerial wins and 6 clearances. And then the 0-0 versus Crystal Palace, 11 aerials and clearances and 83% passing accuracy. A lot of the time, teams were trying to get down at Fulham on the wings, and he was there with Tosin in the middle to sort of bat that away. And I think sort of his decline towards the end of the season, he had a bit of a stinker against Manchester City where an error led to a goal. He went and actually played in the international break for Denmark, got back in the side there. But he didn't seem to really recover. And I think as it got a bit more desperate, the situation for Fulham, his performances did seem to drop off a little bit. But even so, we were never being blown away off the park. And him and Tosin were probably sort of the standout figures there. Like I said, it's going to be so annoying that comes to an end now. And yeah, if we look at sort of Fulham's problems were up front mainly all season. We've got the worst goal conversion in the league. We only scored 25. Mitrovic just couldn't find the back of the net. And meanwhile, like I said, we're the 12th best for conceding goals, and the 9th for shots faced per game as well. Only conceded 3 from set pieces. That's really crucial here. Only 3 from set pieces. Arsenal do tend to be a little bit fragile in this department. So right there, we're seeing that leadership aspect to it, that commanding ability to command in the box and sort of get the best out of his defenders around him, which I really liked about Andersen. Would he work for Arsenal? I don't see why not at all. He's very similar, I think, to Gabriel in many ways, Gabriel Magalhaes. They're only 2 centimetres in difference. Really similar sort of defensive stats if you look at their tackles and interceptions and whatnot. Both quite strong in the air and composed with the ball at their feet. I think he would do quite well next to him in defence, if maybe too similar, really. But Fulham were quite similar to the Gunners. They like to play football. Arsenal ranked 7th for possession and Fulham 11th. And I think Andersen would slot in that regard. Both your main defenders, I saw Rob Holding and Gabriel at centre half. They both play with over 85% passing accuracy. Andersen's around the 81%. But, Fulham tended to face more pressure, and the sort of transition up the pitch was a lot quicker. I think we're number 1 for dribbles. If you look at sort of what Anguissa and Lookman were doing. So, yeah, I do think Arsenal certainly need some defensive shake-up. Pablo Mari hasn't really kicked on, has he? Let's face it. Rob Holding, so I'm not going to sit here and be rude about him. I think he's a good player. But I certainly think Andersen, the step up to Arsenal would be the right level for him. I think he's the kind of player that Arteta needs, a bit more of a backbone. I think this would be a good transfer. And I think you do very well to get him. Maybe he'll stay at Lyon. Maybe he'll go to someone like Tottenham. But yeah, that's my opinion on Joachim Andersen.
Massive thank you to Henry for giving us the expert insight on Joachim Andersen, obviously for Fulham. And Yannick raised a really good point in the chat box, actually. If they'd have had kind of Andersen and Tosin for the whole of the season, maybe Fulham would have stayed up, although goals were maybe more so of an issue for them. And I do feel a bit bad for them because I think Scott Parker's done an okay job. The only issue has been they've won 5 games all season. And when you can't just simply sit on 5 wins and expect to stay in the table, and when you see teams like Newcastle really step it up and Brighton step it up as well towards the end of the campaign, and they're not able to then catch up, that's the early season form that's really ultimately cost clubs like Fulham this season. And I think they'll be in a really good position next season to come up. So the best of luck to Henry next season, and hopefully we'll see Fulham back in the Premier League again next season, because they feel like the Premier League fabric in a way. Fulham back in the day, you remember the old sides they used to come up against, and it's a shame they went down. I think there are other teams in the Premier League, especially down the bottom, that I don't think necessarily deserve to be there over a team like Fulham right now. But I suppose you can't win 5 games and stay up. Let's move on then to the statistical analysis of Joachim Andersen. Now, what I thought would be a good idea, of course, is to compare him to some of obviously our current players, and specifically 2 of the players that I see a lot of you in the chat box have already been talking about in regards to Mavropanos and Saliba. Of course, Rob Holding here too as one of those options. As well, obviously, he started for the most games for us this season at right centre back. I've not included David Luiz in this because he looks like he's going to be going. So, in regards to competition, this is how Andersen stacks up. We are taking this specifically from league stats. So, Saliba playing in Liga, Mavropanos playing in the Bundesliga, Holding playing in the Premier League, as well as Andersen as well. And they are taken over a cross of 90 minutes and averaged. So, looking at their heat maps specifically, I mean, Saliba's is an interesting one because the only one looking like he's playing more on the left-hand side. Now, Saliba is versatile in this sense that he can play as a left-sided centre-back, a right-sided centre-back. He can play in a back 3. He has played kind of alongside Jean-Claude Todibo at the back, but even doing so well on the left, he is someone that played on the right fairly heavily for Saint-Etienne, did still play on the left of a back 3 at times, but he is someone that can play in either of those 2 positions. Andersen, you look more so as a right-sided centre-back, but again, can play in the middle of a back 3 if necessary. Rob Holding, we know, is more of a right-sided centre-back. And ironically, you see him progressing quite far up the pitch, as does Saliba and as does Mavropanos. You see that intense heat in the opposition's half, just in kind of that before you get to the final third of the pitch. Andersen doesn't do that as much. He's much more disciplined in his positioning. Maybe you can take that as a positive, or maybe you can say for a team like Arsenal, you'd hope that they'd be a little bit more expressive with their centre-backs and they want them to push up into the opposition half and to try and play those passes out into those wide positions. Mavropanos, though, is a really interesting one. He has played on the right-hand side of a back three for Stuttgart this season, so he does kind of act as that link between them and the right wing-back, so he does push up a little bit more than what you'd see from a centre-back in a back four like Holding, and he is kind of positioned slightly further up the pitch as well, with the central centre-back of that back three maintaining rather that clear, disciplined role in the side. Going into defensive duels and seeing how they all compare, this is somewhere that certainly Rob Holding does stand out. 7.28 defensive duels and 66.2% being won. You then drop down to Saliba at 65.6 of his duels, but he's only getting involved in 3.22 per game. You go down to someone else who's involved in the most, like Mavropanos, but he is slightly winning less of those. He's in the 50s, and Joachim Andersen is kind of in this middle ground between Saliba and the others, where he's making just over 4 defensive duels per game, but nearly 60% of those are being won. It's an interesting, obviously, insight into how Saliba and Mavropanos have also performed this season, but Andersen isn't necessarily coming out on the top over Rob Holding in defensive duels so far. In terms of aerial duels on the pitch, it's very interesting to see Saliba's at 60% in that kind of area there. You've got Mavropanos with 5.03 and 71.4% of those being won is really excellent from him. Rob Holding at 53.7. So again, Rob Holding, but Mavropanos is certainly the standout player in this area. It is very impressive what he's done. Going on to the loose ball duels, kind of in the areas where there is that loose ball in the middle of the box, have they got the desire and the drive to go in for those 50-50 tackles? Well, Andersen certainly does at 3.57 and winning 55.5% of those, but his frequency is very good in comparison to some of the players that we're looking at. Rob Holding 2.15 with 52.5%. Winning those is quite low on both ends of the scale, so he's not coming in too highly on that. In terms of the most successful, Mavropanos coming out again with 63.3 and a 2.94 frequency is the second highest on our list. But this is a loose ball duel situation. It's kind of a tricky statistic to analyze because it's a risk versus reward situation. Some players go diving into tackles, and that can lead to more fouls and yellow cards and stuff. But if Mavropanos and Andersen enjoy doing that, they are coming out successful more times than they aren't so far. Interceptions, again, Mavropanos coming out very highly too. This is obviously partly in due to the fact that he plays on the right-hand side of a back three, which means he does push further forward and he is able to win more of those interceptions, but it's still an impressive statistic. Next in line is Andersen, just under 6 interceptions per match, and then Holding and Saliba around the same figure for the mid 5.5s. Losses and in their own half, Mavropanos, as we talked about, maybe the most progressive, but that does mean he's losing the ball more than anyone else on this list at 11.38 times, and 45.3% of those are in his own half, which is actually towards more the lower end of the scale for a centre half. They tend to stay on their own half, so when they do lose it, it does tend to be in that side of the pitch. These can be from passes, losses of possession. Saliba, though, is the most risky of all of them, losing the ball in his own half 65.8% of the time, but does lose it the least at 5.85. So there's two kind of things to break down there. Whilst he may lose it in his own half more, he is more comprehensive with the ball and a bit more safe when he's on the ball as well. Andersen falls in the second highest amount of losses at 8.69, with Rob Holding coming in at 7.25. Looking at the other side of things then in recoveries and how many are recovered in the opposition half, again, whilst Mavropanos does lose it a hell of a lot, he also wins it more than anyone else back for his side with 12.64. Andersen then comes in a very close second with just 12. Saliba on 10.7 and Holding on 9.78. I mean, the opposition half recoveries for centre-backs are quite rare for obvious reasons. So you're looking more at the frequency here, and in comparison to the amount of times they lose it, Andersen's losing it 8.6 to 12 recoveries. Saliba's losing it 5.85 to 10 recoveries, which is very good, nearly 11. Holding's losing it Holding's losing it 7.25 to 9.7, which isn't that strong of a ratio. And Mavropanos 11.38 to 12.64, again, is not a very strong ratio. Clearly the ones here, Andersen and Saliba, with a strong loss to recovery ratio in the comparison. In terms of their clearances and their fouls in each game, Mavropanos is finding himself clearing the ball more than anyone else. Rob Holding comes in a very close second. That's part of his game that most people recognise about Rob Holding, is how much he clears the ball away from the box in the air, quite a lot, and of course with just his normal on-the-floor clearances too. Saliba comes out on the lowest in terms of crosses, but he is one of the lower foulers in the team. Mavropanos is quite a rash player, it seems, making 1.44 fouls per game. Holding is a little bit more conservative when he makes those challenges and wins them more often when he does at 0.7. We showed earlier on how good his defensive duel stats are, and that leads to obviously a lower foul count than anyone else on the list. Andersen comes in just under Mavropanos, over 1 at 1.23. So he is making more than a foul per game, which is something maybe you want to look at, but he's a good amount of clearances as well at 3.7. Passing statistics for the defenders, very important if you're going to be moving to Arsenal, to have that clear passing ability in your game. In terms of the highest amount of passing percentage, this is where Saliba really comes into his own. Not only is he making more passes than anyone else on our list here, but 92.6% of those passes are accurate, and that's a really strong thing for the French defender. Andersen comes in with the third lowest amount of accuracy, and also the third amount of frequency as well, very just slightly behind Rob Holding, who has a very good accuracy himself in terms of where he's passing. But it is where these players pass that is actually very crucial. But before we get to that, let's have a look at their long passing stats. Again, Saliba coming out on top with 63.2% of his long passes being accurate, but he is joint lowest in terms of the amount that he's taking. He's much more conservative. His long passes, prefers to play it on the floor more so than the other two. Not saying that this is part of his style that he likes to play on the floor, but in comparison to Andersen and Mavropanos, he is a little bit more reserved, as is Rob Holding. Mavropanos with 7.67 long passes during the games on average, with a 51.6% accuracy is our lowest. And Andersen comes in with the highest amount of long passes and a decent accuracy of 57% as well. But let's have a look at where those passes are actually going with their passes into the final third statistics. And who comes out on top in this one? Yet again, it's William Saliba. And whilst he may be making less long passes, his actual passes into the final third are quite frequent, even though it's the lowest on our list for a centre-back. It shows you that all of these guys like to play those balls into the final third at 7.38 for the Frenchman, but a 74.3% accuracy is very, very good. You then have to go down to Rob Holding to find the next accurate passer into the final third as a progressive centre-back at 71.6. Often we've seen Rob Holding playing the ball out, usually to our right-back, be it Bellerin or Chambers or Cedric or whoever's playing there. That's typically his main pass. It's out to that right-hand side, that right wing, and getting that player moving down the right flank. And that's what you come to expect from any of those players playing in those positions. If you look at Andersen, he's the most frequent with these types of passes, the most progressive and most forward-thinking of the defenders at 8.82 with a 62.5% accuracy, which is actually our lowest, but maybe that's down to the fact he's trying them more often than anyone else on the list as well. Last statistic, which is still important for a defender, because these shooting stats tell us what they're like in terms of their in the corners, if they take any shots from outside the box from when they're progressing forward further up the pitch. Andersen definitely stands out in that sense. He has taken 4 shots from outside the box, with even 1 hitting the target. He's only one also of these 4 to have scored in the league so far, with a header just outside the box. He was in my fantasy team when he did that this season. Saliba, not so accurate with his shots, but he does pop up with a few, but he hasn't managed to get on any on target so far. Holding is notorious for having some quite poor headers in the box from corners. He's only managed to get 2 on target from several that he's taken this season. But Mavropanos is actually the one getting the most shots on target so far with 4, but he hasn't managed to score one just yet, with 2 actually being taken from outside the box. So he can pop up with a shot every so often. It's very rare, but it can happen. So there you go. That is all of kind of the statistical analysis of Joachim Andersen in comparison to William Saliba, Rob Holding, and Konstantinos Mavropanos. So very interesting stats, very interesting stuff to look through. I'm mastering my pronunciation of the Greek defender thanks to Sophie from the Highbury squad. I'm working on it every day. I'm going to get better, I promise. But let's now move on to the section of the show in which you guys become the main focus and where you get your thoughts heard. So if you've got a thought and feeling on our defensive situation, specifically about Joachim Andersen or one of our other key centre-backs and how you see us moving forwards with this, make sure to get your thoughts into the chat box now. We're going to go through as many of them as feasibly possible. Let's go through and scroll up a little bit. JD says Mavropanos is outscoring every other one in this list, so I think we'll sell him. It is interesting how good he has been but you have to remember that he's playing in the right-hand side of a back three, which does enable you a little bit more security in your play, but it's nothing to turn your nose up at. He is doing very well, and you can see why Stuttgart want to keep him next season. Iron Cub says, what you're telling me is we need to ditch Holding and stick to Mavropanos and Saliba from the looks of things. It is encouraging to see those two have such good statistics. It is definitely fair to say. Ponyboy says, even with static evidence, Holding won't get any respect. So much for Holding not being able to pass. Yeah, I mean, he has surprised a lot of people. He's got the highest amount of defensive duels. He wins the more defensive duels than anyone else on the list. He's got very good passing stats as well, especially into the final third. This is what I've said for a long time. I'm absolutely fine with Rob Holding getting a new contract and being at the club. I just don't think he is good enough to be Arsenal's key starting right-sided centre-back, going into next season and beyond. He's a really good player to have in the squad to play in that position, but I don't think he does get enough credit that he deserves. It's more down, I think it's probably down to the fact that a lot of people want to see the likes of Saliba play, so that means they therefore see a lot of criticism in Rob Holding. But actually, when you look at his game and you go into the stats of how he's playing, he is actually quite impressive for a player that is rated so low by quite a few people. Mitchell Balzan says, was Joachim Andersen high in terms of stats, or was it just the eye test? Well, Mitchell, you want to go back and look at the stats, and of course hear from Henry Hill, who was our expert earlier on, and then you get both points of view, so make sure you do go back and listen to it. Tom says, as Holding clearly already is a good centre-back, we should spend our limited funds in the full-back and midfield areas, unless Andersen is dirt cheap, and integrate the youngsters. Tom, to be honest, this is where you're kind of summing up how I feel about the situation. If we do move over to kind of my overriding thoughts on this, Joachim Andersen is 24 years old at this point. You've got Pablo Mari, who's 27, Gabriel, who's 22. You've got Holding, who's 26, I think. Saliba, who's 19, Mavropanos, who's 23. You've got a very core group of players that are not very experienced. If you are going to go out and sign a centre-back, to sign another, not inexperienced, but say less experienced players, you're losing an absolute bundles of experience in David Luiz going. Is it right to go out and spend 20 million on another younger, kind of that end of the bracket centre-back when you've got Saliba here, we've got Holding here, Chambers is looking like he could sign a new contract. Mavropanos, I don't know whether we'll keep him. My kind of mind is that we're very much moving towards probably loaning him out again. Hopefully we get a 1-year extension on his deal before we do that to protect his value. Or we sell him and get a decent fee for him. But I would like to see Saliba given a chance. If we do sign a centre-back, I think it needs to be more down the experienced end of the scale. And I think there are players this season. I mean, David Luiz has arguably been our best centre-back this season, which is crazy. And then you look at someone like Thiago Silva, how many Arsenal fans turned their noses up at him last summer, me included. Really has proved me wrong at Chelsea. And done really well, and they're looking like they're going to keep him for another season there. So you need to think about those types of things. Experience is important in certain positions on the pitch, and someone like Silva can certainly bring that in. But I don't know if Anderson's the right age bracket of player if we're going to bring in a right-sided centre-back, because it could really block the path of someone like Saliba from developing as well, which is important, because I want to see Saliba given the time and chances and opportunities to develop next season. O'Malley says, if Holding stays, he will need to work on his line-breaking passes and his presence in the box. The second point I agree with. Line-breaking passes, though, go have a look, O'Malley, at our pass into the final third statistics, because they're actually more impressive than you may think. T. Irving says, Andersen gives me Pablo Mari vibes. I think we need a more experienced player, maybe like a Bonucci, that we bring in. It's not a bad shout, I say, bringing in. And some people think giving a David Luiz an extension is not necessarily a bad thing, and it's not necessarily a hugely bad thing. I just think a player like David Luiz, whilst I appreciate what he's done for us, there's too many key errors in his game and kind of situations where it's cost us, be it a red card, be it a penalty, and we need to move on from that now. And I think we just need to move into bringing in someone like Saliba and giving him more chances in the team. JD says, extend Mavropanos' contract, loan him out to Stuttgart again. His value will increase further if he has another good season, then either sell or we can keep him. So there you go. Anyway, that is where we are going to finish today's show. In the comment section below, please let me know what you feel about Joachim Andersen as a player. Do you agree with the idea of Arsenal pushing for a signing of his ilk? If you do explain why. And of course, if you don't, definitely explain and give your reasons as to why you don't. Love reading through your responses, and the support for the channel over the recent few days has been, and to be fair, beyond the few days, over the last couple of years, it's been insane. So thank you ever so much for the continued support. If you've just joined us or you're new to the show, first of all, welcome, and I hope you enjoy the content that you're going to be subscribing to. Every single morning at 8 a.m. we do a transfer update show. Every single player that we get linked to, we do one of these statistical analysis shows, breaking them down with the help of an expert in that that field. Tomorrow, you're going to get a tactical breakdown on Max Aarons with help from a Norwich City-based side of things as well, with also statistical analysis looking at him in comparison to Bellerin, and maybe looking at some others that we've been linked to as well, like Emerson, etc. So that should be a good, fun, and interesting video. I'm going to be back a little bit later on at 5 p.m, of course, for Let's Talk Arsenal every single Tuesday and Friday at 5 p.m. also, which is a big chat show where you guys in the chat box get a lot more say in what we talk about too. So make sure you tune in for that. It's been an absolute pleasure, guys, to speak to you as always. And as always, up the Arsenal.